Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really glad you're here. If you enjoy fun content and cool videos, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Let's jump right in.
"149 stairs. That's how many there are to get up to the fire tower I'm posted at. I used to think getting up there meant safety. Now, I'm hoping it just means survival. Climbing 149. Steps when you're healthy is no small feat. When one of your legs has been torn to shreds, you're bleeding from many places, and you're trying to get up there to wrap it. Hoping there's enough bandages so you don't bleed to death. It's a lot more difficult. Then there are the stairs themselves, which also count as a hazard when you have to hop up each one, causing pain to shoot through your injured leg. The stairs are skinny enough as they are, but the closer you get to the top, the smaller they get. How do I know the exact number of steps? I counted them. I also counted which ones I miscalculated my jump, or brushed my foot against the step, or did something else that nearly sent me sailing over the rickety railing to my untimely death. The first time was one step number 3, then 15. 37 was a bad one. 52, 107, 120, and finally 143. I guess it's a good thing I'm deathly afraid of heights. By now you may have figured out I'm a park ranger. How did I end up playing this deadly game of hopscotch? It started a week ago when I got the job. I was super excited because I love working alone and I love nature. What other job blends those two so well? That excitement waned quite a bit when I arrived at the tower on my first day and looked up at those tiny metal steps I would have to climb to get to my job. The whole thing looked about as sturdy as if someone had built it with an erector set. I mean, honestly, seeing surface rust on stairs that have to support your weight is terrifying. And I had to wonder how much I would be swaying when the wind really kicked up. I wanted to close my eyes and just run up, but I didn't dare. I paid attention to every single step, watching the metal bow under the weight of my foot, white-knuckling the railings as I went. Finally, I reached the top and knocked on the trapdoor that had to be opened to let me in. I met the ranger who would be training me. His name was Bob, and he looked every bit how I envisioned a park ranger would look. Tall and thin, wiry, but not scrawny. With a 5 o'clock shadow, because he never had the time to shave properly, Bob was one of those guys who seemed to always have a smirk on their face, like they've just been told the greatest joke of all time, but they don't want to let you in on it. He spent the entire shift showing me around and then boring me to tears with all
the little details of working in a fire tower.
The place wasn't bad. I was expecting an empty room with a card table and a radio, but this was nice. It reminded me of a small apartment, or the inside of a small RV. There was a kitchenette with a microwave, sink, and mini fridge. There was a couch and a couple of chairs. And most importantly, there was a bathroom at one point. At one point, I thought there would be an outhouse at the base of the tower I would have to use. The thought of going down all those steps while holding number 1, or especially number 2, was something I didn't even want to have nightmares about. Just before the end of the shift, the next ranger came up. His name was Toby. Toby looked nothing like I envisioned rangers looking like. He was overweight but made up for it by being under tall. He had a look of mischief in his eyes, like a 7th grader who had just dropped a cherry bomb down the toilet and was trying. To walk away looking nonchalant, he smiled and shook my hand. "So did Bob bore you to tears?" He said. "Not quite to tears," I said. "Hey, I'm a good trainer," Bob said, looking offended, yet still wearing that grin. "Did you tell him everything?" Toby said. "Pretty sure," Bob said. "Did you tell him about?" Toby leaned closer and whispered something in Bob's ear that I couldn't hear. Bob's grin grew. "No, I didn't tell him about that." "Maybe we should wait until he's done training," Toby said. "What?" I said, looking back and forth between them. "We'll tell you once you're done job shadowing," Bob said with that infuriating grin. When we left, I was so focused on what they weren't telling me, I nearly missed the first step and plunged to my death. "Yeah, you're going to want to focus on those steps," Bob said. "We had a coworker get hurt really bad because of them. Is he okay now?" Bob looked away. Toby came over and volunteered. "He's dead." That was definitely what I wanted to hear. The next few days were a blur. Between total boredom with reading the procedure book and Bob grinning, all the while refusing to tell me the big secret, I was getting super frustrated. I couldn't wait for my first night working alone. At least I had brought some supplies up to keep in the tower. Some snacks, a few books, and a tablet to make some notes on if I started writing a story. Finally, the night came. I was working on my own for the first time. Surprisingly, Bob's smile vanished as he told me, "Did you ever read anything off of Reddit?" He said. I shrugged. I don't really read much other than books. Sign up for Reddit, then go to the No Sleep subreddit and look for a story called I Was a Park Ranger Stationed in a Fire Tower. It had a strange set of rules. Read that. It'll tell you what to do. Okay, I said. That's the big secret? Read someone's made-up story? It might seem made up, he said, but trust me, follow the rules. I tried to read his expression to see if he was messing with me or not. In the 5 days I'd known him, there was never a time he wasn't wearing that stupid grin until now. His face was serious as a heart attack. All right, I said. I'll look it up later on my phone. You really should do it as soon as I leave. Okay, good luck. He stepped over to the door and went down the stairs. A few minutes later, I heard his truck drive away. What the hell was that about? I stood in the middle of the room looking out at the beautiful trees, but not even seeing them. My mind was occupied by what Bob had said. It has to be a prank, I said to the empty room. Bob and Toby cooked this up to scare me on my first night. Well, I'm not falling for it. I did my first round of walking around on the outside walkway, looking for any sign of fires. We worked 12-hour shifts, so I was working from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. It was late summer and still warm enough to go without a jacket, at least on my first round. By the time I got to my fourth round, there was a chill in the air. I started doing my rounds from the inside and made a mental note to bring a jacket with me tomorrow. It seemed odd to be talking about a jacket in late summer. But in the forest, the temperatures can vary wildly. It could be 30 degrees at night and 80 during the day. I stepped back inside and saw my phone had lit up with a text message. I looked at it, and it was Bob. Did you read the rules yet? No, I texted back. You don't have much time. I knew this was a joke. It had to be a joke. The old-timer's pulling a fast one on the new guy. Jerking his chain a little. I'll get right on it, I texted. You better. I put my phone down and looked at the clock. It was 10 minutes after 10. Outside was now completely dark, creating a very disconcerting illusion where when I would look outside, all I saw was my reflection. I decided to turn some lights off and go with just the bare minimum. That reduced the reflection some, and I could see some trees outside. I did a slow pan around, then grabbed a bag of chips and a soda, sat down, and worked on a crossword puzzle. That only lasted a half hour until I was bored with it. I picked up a book and started to read. I woke sometime later with my head resting on the back of the chair, chip crumbs all over my shirt, and the book laying on the floor. I stretched and looked over at the clock. It read 2:13. I jumped up, flinging the bag of chips to the floor, realizing I'd missed several checks, then ran around the room staring out at the trees. After my quick lap, I took a breath and did another slower lap to make sure there was no smoke. Thank God there was none. I chided myself for falling asleep on duty like that as I cleaned up my mess. I decided I should set an hourly alarm on my phone so that wouldn't happen again. When I picked up the phone, I noticed there was a series of texts from Bob. Did you read it yet? Why aren't you answering? Are you all right? Don't open the door for any reason. The last one sent chills down my spine. Why would I open the door in the middle of the night? As I was thinking this, another text came in. For the love of God, Reddit. What the hell was wrong with this guy? Was he seriously losing sleep for a stupid joke? I decided I would humor him and read the story. I opened my phone and went to the Reddit site. I had just signed up and put my information in when I heard static over the radio. I stepped to the receiver and checked it. Static blared out of it, making me jump as I heard a faint voice in it. Tower 7, do you read me? I heard from a voice I could barely hear through the static. I hesitated for a moment, trying to remember if this was Tower 7 or not. Tower 7, do you read me? The voice said, sounding a little more desperate. I picked up the mic and keyed it. "This is Tower 7. Go ahead. It's good to hear you, Tower 7. The voice said, suddenly clear. "I didn't think you would answer." "Oh, here I am, awake and alert." "Answering you," I said. "What did you need?" "I already have what I need," the voice said, sounding like it was chuckling. "I'd like to come visit if that's all right." "Tower 7, this is Base. Who are you talking to?" "I don't know. Someone on the radio," I said into the mic. 7. "There's no one else on this channel," Base said. I got chills for a moment. What did that mean? How was I hearing someone that Base couldn't? Why would someone be calling now? Then it hit me that the Base dispatcher was probably in on the joke too. "Okay, Base. Maybe it was just some random transmission." "Tower 7, the voice said. "Am I all right to come from a visit?" I hesitated for a moment. What if it wasn't a joke? Who the hell is walking through the forest at 2:30 in the morning? "Maybe we'll do that visit another time," I said. "Visit," Base said. "What visit?" 7, you know it's against policy to have visitors. Sorry, Base. I won't be letting anyone visit." More static came over the radio. I could swear I could hear someone say something in the middle of it. It sounded like, "We'll see." I put down the mic and picked up my phone to read the story when I saw something off in the distance. It was a light, but it was hovering like a helicopter. I switched my phone to camera mode, zoomed in, and took a picture. It was weird because the light was blue. I didn't think helicopters had blue lights on them. Also, this light wasn't flashing. It was solid the whole time. It came closer, and I took another picture. It floated even closer. It was mesmerizing. There was no sound. No hum, no worry of tiny blades keeping it afloat like a drone. Nothing. It was about the size of a basketball and glowing the most brilliant blue I'd ever seen. I reached out for it and it backed away from my hand. I took a step closer to the edge of the walkway, reaching out as far as my arm could stretch. It backed away a few inches, just out of reach. I stood on my tiptoes, pushing against the railing, trying to touch it. It moved away another inch. I reached the tipping point and pinwheeled my arms to regain. My balance and shove back against the railing, I fell onto the walkway. Landing hard on my backside and hitting the back of my head against the window, I looked up and the light was gone. I shook my head, painfully stood up, and went back inside. I didn't want to do a patrol but figured I'd better. After a slow walk around, collapsed in the chair and set my alarm to go off in an hour. After sitting there for a few minutes, I could feel myself nodding off. So I opened my phone and started reading the story. After about 10 minutes, I lowered my phone, eyes wide, hands shaking. "It can't be real," I whispered. "It's just a joke." I scrolled back through the story and reread the rules. Never, under any circumstances. Leave the fire tower until you are relieved. Turn off all lights between the hours of 2 and 3 a.m. if you receive a radio, transmission, or phone call between those hours. Do not answer. If anyone knocks on the trapdoor during those hours, tell them they'll have to wait until morning. Do not open the door. If you see a glowing object floating toward the tower, don't look at it. Cover your eyes and count to 50. When you open your eyes, it should be gone. If not, cover and count to 50 again. If animals surround the tower, don't go down to look. Fire your flare gun into the air twice, 1 minute apart, and lock yourself in the bathroom and hope for the best. My skepticism started to waver. How could they have known about those things? Unless there was a powerful banging at the trapdoor that made me jump. "Who is it?" I said. No one answered. A minute later, the pounding resumed. I searched for anything I could use as a weapon, digging through the silverware drawer and finding an old, dull paring knife. It backed as far away from the trapdoor as possible while staying inside. The pounding repeated. Somehow, through the fear that coursed through my veins, I found my voice. "You'll have to come back in the morning," I said. "But I'm here now, Tower," said the voice from the radio. "Let me." In the last 3 words changed from asking to demanding. The voice also became deeper and more menacing. I didn't answer. I just slid down to the floor and hugged my knees, holding the knife in front of me, silently searching through the story on my phone to see if there was something I missed. Some way I could remedy the situation, but there was nothing. And the end of the story didn't give me much hope. I covered my ears and closed my eyes as the pounding continued. Now mixed with the voice that was going back and forth between pleading and threatening, it whispered, then it screamed. It sounded like a young boy, then it sounded demonic. I rocked back and forth, trying to keep some measure of sanity as the assault continued. I began to wonder how long the trapdoor would hold before whatever it was broke through. Then suddenly it stopped. As happy as I was that there was no more pounding and yelling, I didn't trust it. My entire body was on pins and needles. It felt like the calm before the storm. The fire tower shook. It felt like an earthquake, only different. I stood and went out to the walkway to see what was happening. When I looked down, I couldn't believe it. The tower was surrounded by animals of all kinds. Deer, squirrels, bears, moose, any forest animal you could imagine. And even a couple I couldn't and didn't want to identify. As I leaned over watching this strange menagerie, a moose rammed into one of the tower's legs. It sent a shockwave through the entire metal framework. By the time it got up to me, the tower was shaking so hard it made me lose my balance. I toppled over the edge and fell. I threw my arm out, attempting to catch the rail, but only touched it with my fingertips. I knew I was falling to my death. There was no doubt. The wind rushing in my ears didn't drown out the sound of my screaming. It sounded odd, like I was listening to someone else scream. I closed my eyes, not wanting to know when the end was coming. Suddenly something hit me hard in the ribs. I looked, and I had hit a tree limb, but it didn't stop me. The branch broke, sending me falling again until I hit another branch. This one tore a gash on my leg as I flipped head over heels and fell again. The next branch grazed my head and made me see stars. I bounced off another branch, hitting my shoulder, then took one to the knee and landed flat on my back on the ground. I lay there dazed, injured but alive and surprised to be so. As I tried to regain my bearings, I saw the animals rushing over to me. I doubted they wanted me to pet them while they licked my wounds and cared for me while singing Disney songs. I jumped up as pain rocked my body from more places than I wanted to think about. I hopped over to the tower steps and began my long, arduous journey. Just a half step away from a bunch of animals that seemed dead set on my destruction. About halfway up, I realized there was no more pursuit. So I slowed, trying to conserve energy. I got to the top, unlocked the hatch, and tried to push it open. It took several tries to get enough strength while balancing on one leg, standing on the tiniest of all the tiny steps. As soon as I got it open, I turned and slammed it shut, locking it. I hobbled into the room, found the first aid box, and struggled to get to the couch. I wanted nothing more than to curl up in a ball and forget this day ever happened. I tried to easily lay myself down, but ended up collapsing in an excruciating heap. Once down, I focused on bandaging the leg since it was losing the most blood. Once done, I proceeded to bandage all the rest of the areas that needed. "How are you feeling, Tower 7? I heard the voice say over the radio. I didn't answer. "Oh, come on now, Tower. Don't be like that," it said. "Talk to me. Let me in, and we'll have a conversation." I lay there trying to think of anything other than pain and this voice. There has to be punishment for disobeying the rules. My blood ran cold. How did that thing know about the rules? I reached into my pocket and was astonished that my phone was there. It had a cracked screen, but was usable. I texted Bob. I'm alive somehow. I broke half the rules without knowing it because I read the story too late. Are you all right? I took pictures of my bandaged leg that was wrapped but blood was still seeping through. I took pictures of my battered face and my bruised ribs. I sent them all to Bob. "Good Lord, man, what did you do?" "I fell out of the tower." "You did what?" "Was leaning over the edge of the walkway when one of the animals smashed into the support leg and shook the tower, knocking me over. How are you alive?" "Tree caught me." "I'll call the paramedics and come in early to relieve you. I'll be laying here on the couch, bleeding." Then I added, "I'll follow the rules from now on." There was static on the radio, and a faint voice said, "You'd better." When Bob unlocked the hatch and led the EMTs in, he didn't have that grin on his face. "You okay, kid?" He said, "Hunky-dory, how about you?" I said, laying on the cushions that were soaked in my own blood. He might be in shock, one of the EMTs said. My rescue was an adventure in itself. When they examined me, they informed me that my leg was broken. I was sweating trying to go back down those steps with a splint on. I could just see me slipping near the top and falling again. There didn't seem to be any trees close enough to catch me on this side. Apparently the EMTs seemed to be thinking the same thing. Someone came up with the brilliant idea of tying me to a backboard and trying to carry me down the steps. After 2 EMTs nearly fell, they decided to tie it to a rope and lower me like a sack of potatoes. They rigged up a rope around one of the support poles for the walkway. Watching the rope scrape along the edges of the wood, fraying as it went, was probably more terrifying than anything I'd experienced last night. Floating in the air, spinning slowly, didn't help my fear of heights any. I decided to close my eyes and try to stay as still as possible so the balance wouldn't be disturbed and slide me out of the end to fall to my death. I was extremely grateful when the board hit the ground. My adrenaline finally crashed, and I fell into a deep sleep as they loaded me into the ambulance. Truth be told, I'm absolutely terrified to go back to the tower. It's not like I have a lot of choices. Park ranger is a good-paying job, and sitting around watching for fires is about the easiest job I've ever heard of. If you take away the supernatural voices, bizarre wildlife, strange lights, and the stares of death, I'm hoping paying attention to the rules will keep me safe. I'm posting this as a warning. If your job has some strange rules, make sure you follow them, no matter how stupid you think they might be. When I was in my 20s, I took a job as a park ranger at a state park. It was the perfect job for me at the time. I love working outdoors. Every day presented new challenges, and I got to work alone. On days when I could get my work done early, I would find a beautiful spot somewhere in the park and read or listen to music. It was therapeutic. I had just gone through a tough year. School kicked my ass, and I had just broken up with my long-term girlfriend. I needed an escape, and the park provided it. While working during the day was amazing, the night shift at the park wasn't as relaxing. Do you know how uncomfortable the night can make even the most comfortable spaces in your house feel? Well, the pitch black of Mother Nature is like that feeling on steroids. The absolute worst place to sit during a night shift was the North End WATCHTOWER. Everyone who worked there called it the Sentinel because it was massive and looked out across the whole of the forest that made up the park. It was tall, just over 100 feet above the ground, and made of old pine that seemed to retain the scent, as if it had just been cut the day before. It was basically like a little cabin on top of really tall stilts. However, inside wasn't exactly like a luxury box. The wall that faced the forest was one large window that gave pretty breathtaking views, but was also really good at giving you feelings of vertigo. Inside, there was relatively meager furniture. There were just 2 chairs, one for sitting in good weather, and one insulated one for bad weather, an old desk, a single bare light bulb overhead, and a small fan to help keep you cool. I always brought something to read or write because the night watch in the tower is dull as hell. It was quite a hike. 2, it took about 10 minutes or so to walk the 10 stories. When you had to do it in the dark at night, it tended to take a little longer. Each story you climbed disappeared into the darkness below you. It could be a bit unsettling once you're on top of the tower. Your job for that shift is to basically look for fires or anything else out of the ordinary. When there was a full moon, you could see so much of the woods. But when there was a new moon or cloudy, you couldn't see a goddamn thing. If it wasn't for the bare light bulb in the cabin, you couldn't see anything. Typically, you keep in touch with people on the walkie and just idle away the hours. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I never dozed off for a while. But if you had come to visit me some nights, I might have had sleep creases on my face. Most nights when I was in the Sentinel, I brought a book and read, or a journal to write in. Basically occupy my mind for the shift and ignore the dark. Rangers, especially older ones, love to tell stories about the weird shit they've seen over the years. People tend to think of parks as safe zones where the most deadly thing that can happen is an animal attack. And yes, while animal attacks do occur, most of the violence comes from people. Campers, drunk, will get into fights or fall into fire pits or get lost on their way to the bathroom. Drifters will sneak into the park and stay in unoccupied cabins or buildings. I cannot tell you the number of times I've walked into squatters, chilling in a distant ranger cabin, and have had to evict them, but one thing no one outside the world of park rangers likes to talk about is that parks, especially at night, tend to be a haven for criminals. I know it sounds crazy at the outset, but it happens. Murders, rapes, drug activity, you name it, it happens. I was lucky to never deal with any of the more heavy stuff a few times. We found drugs to be sold or a small patch of marijuana growing in the woods, but nothing horrifying. But if you've put your time in at a park, eventually, you'll run across something that will haunt your dreams. Not too far from where our park was, there was a correctional facility. It wasn't Alcatraz or anything that high security, but the people there were serious criminals. It was a distance away on clear nights. Could barely make out the lights from the yard along the horizon, but it loomed large in your imagination. Your rational brain knew that any criminal could have to brave the dangerous forest in pitch black before they ran into you. But a tiny flicker of light kept a corner of your brain illuminated. It could happen. It won't, but it could. It was near the end of summer, and some of the staff had already split for the year. I was on for a few more weeks, but I was going to get night duty for most of those days since I was lowest on the totem pole. Worse, I would be on sentinel duty those nights. I know having the least amount of seniority was the main reason. But I know that my boss and a few older rangers play poker those nights as well. Since I had no money or skills, I was sent up into the tower. As the sun was starting to set, I walked into the central station at the park entrance. A few rangers were milling about, shooting the shit. The day shift was relaying night shift things they should be aware of. That kind of stuff. It mainly was nothing, not a ton of campers in the park this time of year. Just a few sightings of bears nearby. Someone also swears they saw a bobcat, but wasn't sure. But then someone walked into the station, and the tenor of the night shifted. "Excuse me," a woman about 40 said in an overly polite way. She was dressed in leggings, and my guess was she was here to walk the trails. My boss and wannabe Casanova Jonesy noticed the outfit and lack of a wedding ring and shot her his 10-cent smile. "Welcome to a state park. How can I help you today?" he said, his words dripping with saccharin. Hi, she said, a little taken aback. "I wanted to report something, ... Well, maybe report is a bit extreme. But just make you aware of something I saw out on the trails." "Sure, what did you see?" She shifted her weight, a little uneasy it seemed. I clocked it and thought it was a little unusual. Sometimes when people see a bear or a bobcat, two things that had been spotted recently, it might have their adrenaline pumping and be a bit jittery. But this wasn't that. It sounds crazy, but, I think I saw something stalking me out in the woods. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Probably gave you a bit of a spook," Jonesy said. "We've had a few bear and bobcat sightings lately." "No," she said definitively. "It wasn't a bear or a cat. I think it was a person." "What trail?" "Sandalwood Loop B, I think it's called. That's not that far from a few campgrounds and fishing. Cabins, they didn't look like a camper." Everyone in the cabin had stopped talking and turned their attention to the woman. She noticed, and you could see the red rush to her cheeks. What did they look like? Shadowy, she said, like they were afraid of the sun or something, and they were following you. I caught something in the corner of my eye around the last turn of the loop. I stopped and pretended to stretch, and I saw something in the woods just off the trail. They were hiding behind a tree, eyeballing me. "Jesus," Jonesy said. "I'm sorry that happened to you." "Thank you," she said, her voice going soft. They followed me until I nearly got to the end of the loop. I started running, then and lost sight of them. Jonesy turned back to two of the older rangers and told them to hop in a gator cart and check out the woods for anything. He told them to keep their walkies on and take a sidearm just in case. They left in a flash, and Jonesy turned his attention to the woman. "Can you tell me anything that might help? Did they have any kind of identifiable clothes? Did they speak to you? She interrupted. They made noises. Noises? Jonesy asked, slightly confused. Yes, a few. They made a kind of a chittering noise, and a faint, yelling kind of sound. Possibly cicadas, another older ranger said. A group of them can scare the fur off a cat. Maybe, I don't know. They also whistled, but not like they were whistling at me. It's like they were trying to blend in with nature. Can you describe the noise? She whistled something that I knew right away, that sounds like a wood thrush. How do you know that? Jonesy said. Not being able to help himself? My grandpa was an avid birder. He turned his attention back to the woman. Did you want to file a police report, or... No, she said quickly. I don't even have that much information. I just was scared and wanted to let you know, just in case. You sure? Yes, she said. I don't think anyone else was on the trail after me, but I didn't feel right not telling you. I'm so sorry that happened to you here. The park is supposed to be a place to relax. She laughed nervously. Jonesy shot her a calming smile. Here's my card, he said, handing her one. If you change your mind, please call me. She pocketed it and nodded. She turned to leave and then stopped. She turned back and after a brief pause said something else that was weird. I saw this thing on both sides of the trail. He crossed behind you. I didn't notice him doing that, but he must have, because I saw him on both sides. Unless there was more than one of them, I said, instantly regretting it. Jonesy turned and gave me a Jesus dude look, and I clammed up. Do you need someone to escort you to your car, ma'am? No, I'm right out there. Thanks, though, she said as she walked out the door. We heard her motor away a few moments later. Sorry, I said before Jonesy could say anything. He sighed, no worries. Just don't go freaking out, guests. We need people like her to come back. People like or her to come back, right? Was I too obvious? Jonesy said with a smile. What do you think she saw? I asked. A Wendigo, one of the other rangers said, and everyone laughed. Having read about Wendigos and skinwalkers in a mythology class, I didn't find it so amusing. Might have been her eyes playing tricks on her. If someone is out there, those two will find them. They're good at tracking, and whatever is out there couldn't have gotten too far. Great night to be up in the tower, I said with a smirk. That's probably the safest place to be. Jonesy said, no one climbs 10 stories if they don't have to. I hung around for about another half hour or so to see what came of the trackers. They came back and said there wasn't anything around the Sandalwood Loop. No footprints of anything they saw. Granted, the leaves had started to fall, so it was hard to see anything on the ground. But I trusted their tracking skills. Not going to lie. Even with the guys coming back empty-handed, I was still a bit nervous about the shift. Jonesy was right, though. No one climbs stairs unless they have to. This is still America, after all. Laziness always wins. Also, there was nothing in the cabin above the trees except me, a book, and a journal. Nothing worth making the journey. As the sun slid behind the horizon, I started my trek to the Sentinel. When I got to the platform at the bottom, something caught my eye. The tower base is lousy, with stickers, tags, and names carved into the pine. Usually it's Joe plus Jane for Riva, or something along those lines. But what had been freshly cut was a bit different. It was a pair of eyes. Had the earlier events not happened, I probably wouldn't have even noticed the eyes. I chalked it up to my mind already being primed to see some spooky shit. I assumed it had been some kids earlier or one of the older rangers looking to give me a scare. Whatever it was. I did a quick glance around me before I started up the stairs. From the vantage point high above the trees, you can see storms come rolling in. Tonight was no exception. It was a waning crescent moon tonight, so it would be a bit dark, but those rain clouds made it pitch black. The only natural light I would see would be the occasional burst of lightning inside the clouds. The wind had picked up too. You can tell because there is a slight shift in the tower when the winds gust. Not a lot, but just enough to notice. You get used to it, but when it first hits, it can be a bit jarring. There were a few wind gusts, but I settled in for the evening and stopped noticing. About an hour later, my walkie crackled to life. How's the view? It was Jonesy. Great, I said. We're about to do a pass around the park. Wanted to give you a heads up. I leaned forward in my chair and glanced through the window towards the base. I saw Jonesy and a few other rangers getting into their gator carts to head out. Their headlights were bright, but only because there was literally no other light down there. The beams themselves only saw a few feet in front of you.
Thanks.
You guys need me to scout anything for you? No, we'll be fine. But hey, if you see any wendigos, let me know, huh? Funny, I said, if you hear any thrushes singing, run. Those boys should all be in bed by now. I'll keep that in mind. Be back in a half hour, 40 minutes tops. Over and out, I said, and I placed down my walkie and watched those tiny ants drive off into the woods and out of sight. I kicked back in my chair and started reading again. That's when I heard a board creak at first. My mind assumed it was probably just the wind pushing the tower. It can cause a creaking sound in the tower. But my brain pushed away the fog of rationality, and a more terrible thought became clear. What if someone was outside the door? I would have heard them walking up the stairs, right? I looked around for anything I could use as a weapon. Outside of smashing my walkie or flashlight into this potential person's head, there wasn't much. If I did need to escape, light and communication would probably be a good thing to have. Didn't want to go and break essential equipment. I grabbed my walkie and pressed the button. Jonesy, I said, trying to sound confident. Jonesy, you out there? I knew there was a chance he might be out of range. Sometimes these walkies can be wonky in the forest, and I was praying he would respond. But the longer I heard the static, the less hope I had he could hear me. Now, Jonesy. Just curious if you guys had circled back this way. Finally, yeah, Ned forgot his light, and we came back, but we're heading out now, okay? I said, hey, odd question, but did anyone come up to the Sentinel by chance? Just you, he said, and then added, why? Thought I heard a board creak. It's breezy tonight, storm coming in, probably just the wind. Or the Wendigo, he said, chuckling to himself. Have fun? I said, ending the conversation. I put my walkie back down and stared at the door that leads to the stairs. The odds that someone would have walked up here to put a scare in me was remote. Like Jonesy said earlier, no one walks 10 stories unless they have to. But what if the woman from earlier had seen someone or a group and they were looking for a place to hide out? Would the Sentinel be a good choice? Maybe. I don't know how the criminal mind works. Regardless, for my own sanity, I would have to swing that door open and see if anything was there. It was probably nothing, but I needed to be sure. If not, the rest of my shift was going to be miserable. I quietly walked across the cabin to the door and grabbed the handle. I counted down from 3 in my head and swung the door open. There was nothing there. In the distance, a flash of lightning crashed and thunder rolled, but no person was standing there. I sighed and then stepped out onto the landing. You could really feel the breeze up here now. That storm was moving in quickly. You could smell the rain coming. The earthy scent that the raindrops stir up was all around me, even though I was sure no one was outside the cabin. I wanted to check out the stairs just in case. I walked over to the stairs and stared down. In the darkness, the stories below me just merged with the night. I couldn't see anything. I pulled out my flashlight and shone the beam down the stairs to the next landing. The flashlights we had were decent, but not ideal. Cops got 1,000 lumen flashlights to shine in your eyes when they pull you over. We were lucky to get half that. It's not like we'd need adequate lights working in the pitch black or anything. I walked down to the first landing and glanced around. Nothing seemed out of place. I flashed my light down to the next landing, and something caught my eye. The light reflected off of something on the stairs. Not unlike a toddler, I made my way to the shiny object. I was a little surprised to find a small piece of reflective strip on the stairs. I didn't remember seeing it on the way up. I would have picked it up to throw it away. It looked like it had been ripped off of a jacket or uniform or something. But how did this get here? The wind might have blown this up from a campsite. That felt wrong. It was I turned to climb back up to the cabin when I froze. On the railing, someone had carved another set of eyes. I didn't move. I stood there as my brain tried to piece together an excuse that made sense, but it was failing. Even when I started to feel the patter of rain on my face, I didn't move. What the hell was going on? Fearing that someone might be looking at me, I clicked off my flashlight. I know I said earlier that I didn't want to waste essential tools. But at this point, I was ready to brain someone until the damn thing broke. The rain started to come down a bit harder, which helped to break me from my fugue state. I was about to start back up towards the cabin when I heard the floorboards above me squeak. There was a crash of thunder nearby, and it barely registered in my mind. I was so tuned into the symphony of pine stairs that a bomb could have blown off near me. I'd miss it. After what felt like 17 hours, I hadn't heard anything else. I relaxed a little bit. It was probably nothing. My mind was overactive, and I was stringing together disparate events into a cohesive narrative to scare myself. I was sure that was it. Then I heard something drag across the pine above me. It sounded like someone was gouging out the wood. I didn't know what to do. My legs felt like jello. I wanted to go streaming down the stairs, but I was afraid I would make too much noise. Plus, the idea of running down 8 stories of now wet steps didn't sound ideal. I slowly started making my way towards the stairs heading down when the gouging noises above me stopped. After a slight pause, I heard footsteps head towards the door of the cabin. Someone was up there. ... I was sure of it. What they wanted to do. ... Well, I didn't want to think about that. I slowly started down the stairs, careful to not let any of them squeak underneath me. I kept my flashlight off and just descended into the darkness. I reached for where my walkie should be and cursed to myself when I realized I had left it up there, as if on cue. I heard the cabin door swing back open and heard an object crashing through the trees towards the ground. As it passed me, I heard the familiar static of the walkie. Whatever was in the cabin had just tossed my only lifeline to the outside world. Well, fuck. That wasn't good. I hastened my trip down the stairs as I rounded the landing for the 6th story. I suddenly heard the familiar call of a wood thrush 3 landings below me. Only the thrushes were gone at this time of night. This was a person. He made the noise again, and it clicked as to why they would give their position up. He was signaling to the person above me. He was letting him know where I was. 1 above. 1 below, I was trapped. Above me, I heard someone start down the steps. They moved slow and steady, deliberate. Whoever was up there was coming down to me, and I had nowhere to go. I thought about jumping down and trying to grab a branch on the way, but knew that would end poorly for me in the best of scenarios and deadly in the worst. They rounded the 2nd story down. I was running out of time for a plan. I could run down the stairs and try to bull rush whoever was down there. But the rain was coming down harder now, and we could slip and fall off the tower. The only thing I had going for me was the darkness. I had the only light, and outside of the occasional lightning flash, it was dark as hell. It would cloak me if I could find a spot to hide, as he rounded the landing above me. I made a decision that, looking back, was one of the wildest things I've ever done in my life. I wake up some nights gasping for breath because I dreamed about doing this. The instinct to survive is so deeply ingrained into our animal brain that I suppressed all the fear. I would usually have and just acted as quietly as I could. I climbed over the handrail on the landing and hung off the side of the stairs. My feet felt for the handrail on the landing below me to help steady me, but my toes just grazed against the wood. I couldn't reach them. My arms started burning as they held my weight. I clawed into the wood with my hands, hoping my nails digging into the pine would counteract my wet palms. I closed my eyes, partially to shut out the pain in my arms and partly because I was afraid the whites of my eyes would get noticed. I heard the footsteps turn the corner and start to come down the stairs right next to me. I held my breath. My arms were burning, and I was so afraid I would lose my grip. The person took the steps, one at a time, slow as possible. They were looking for me on the landing, but didn't see me. Suddenly, whatever it was started chittering into the darkness. A few seconds later, the wood thrush called back. The footsteps stopped coming down the stairs and started going back up. No. In a flash, a solution came to me. I used my right foot to kick off my left boot. Suddenly, I was glad I didn't take Jonesy's advice to keep the laces as tight as a drum. I kicked my boot onto the landing below me, and they landed with a heavy crash. The footsteps stopped going up the stairs. I freed my other boot and it crashed down next to their partner on the landing. It sounded like I was down there. The footsteps walked right past me, heading down quickly to surprise me on the landing below. As soon as they rounded the corner, I called upon all the strength in my body and quickly pulled myself back up over the railing. I landed with a thud which gave away the ghost. I popped up and dashed up the stairs to the top of the cabin. I knew they'd be right behind me, so I didn't hesitate. In seconds, I was at the top of the stairs and outside the cabin door. I was met with another pair of eyes carved into the wood. They stared back at me, watching and waiting to see what I was going to do next. I dashed into the cabin and leaned against the door to brace. Against anyone trying to burst in. I knew 2 people, at least I hoped they were people, were coming, and they were going to not stop until they got into the cabin. Another bolt of lightning flashed nearby, and the ensuing thunder shook the tower. Things were close. I glanced up and noticed that someone had carved another set of eyes staring at me just above the window. Only this time, they left a message with the picture, "You watch us, but who's watching you?" I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I swallowed hard as I heard 2 sets of footprints reach the top of the landing. Sure enough, they charged into the door, pushing it open slightly. I braced hard against the door and started yelling. Just the most primal screaming I've ever done. They kept thumping the door. Whemp. Whemp. Each thrust pushed the door open a bit more and a bit more. I was struggling to hold out against them. I was tired and my socks were slipping on the wood. It was only a matter of time until they burst through. I thought about my life. I thought about my parents, my friends, all the things I'd never get to do. Then the hair on my arms started to stand on end. Then my leg hair. Then my hair started to rise. Only, it wasn't fear that was causing this. It was something much more primal, much more natural, much more powerful. I dashed across the room and sat on the insulated stool, a beat-up wooden seat with glass legs, and held my feet up. As the door burst open, I saw 2 sets of eyes staring at me. The 2 faces grinned, and the cabin light reflected off the blade of a knife. I screamed as everything went white, and what sounded like the sky splitting in 2 erupted around us. Lightning had struck the tower. I was safe. Glass and wood are shitty conductors, but the 2 men who were standing in a puddle weren't as lucky. The blast had shocked them and sent them tumbling down the side of the tower. When I opened my eyes, I could see the burn marks across the pine and smell the fire that had been started. Without giving anything a second thought, I dashed out of the door, careful not to catch myself on fire, and ran down the stairs of the Sentinel. It may take 10 minutes to climb up, but it took me about 2 minutes to get down, as soon as I hit the bottom landing. I saw the lights of the gator carts pull up. I collapsed on the ground as Jonesy and the other rangers rushed over to me. I glanced up and saw his face, and I started to sob. Above him, the flames licked and ate away the tower floor by floor. It would burn for over an hour. I later learned that the 2 men killed by the lightning were escaped convicts from the jail. Both of them had beat up a guard, grabbed their clothes, and headed out into the woods 3 days earlier. The escape had been kept quiet because they didn't want to spook anyone and thought they'd track them down in the woods, sooner rather than later. Why scare people if you didn't have to? Also, fuck that noise. They both had been convicted of murder. And, I swear to God, this is what the police told me. The criminals had ill intent for me. I told the officers I had gathered that, thinking back, they probably watched me climb up the tower later and saw an easy target. When I had first heard the floorboard squeak outside the door, it's the criminal that had followed me up made. A quick decision to climb up onto the roof of the cabin to prevent me from seeing him until he was ready. I probably didn't hear anything on the roof because of the fan and the rain. I think about what he could have done to me had he caught me by surprise. Jumping down from the roof and shudder. At best, I'd be stabbed by a madman. At worst, I'd tumble 10 stories to my death either way. It's not a great thing to linger on during idle hours. That was my last day as a ranger. I was due back to school in a few weeks, and I needed time to calm my nerves. Everyone understood. They even paid me out for the week, which was nice. I also took a small part of the Sentinel as a memento of the ordeal. Every time I look at the piece of wood I took from the tower, I wasn't reminded of what could have happened to me, but instead of what I did to survive, someone was watching me that night. But it wasn't just the criminals. It was nature herself. I was in the middle of a routine patrol of the park when my radio crackled to life. The frequency didn't indicate an emergency, so I pulled my truck over to the side of the road and called into base. On the other end of the radio was Emmett, a fellow park ranger and one of my favorite coworkers. "What's up, Emmett?" I asked. "Not much, Aiden. Just got someone here who wants to know if we've seen her missing brother." "Have we? Doesn't look familiar to me, but since you're due for lunch about now, why don't you head back?" "Sounds good to me." I put the radio down, shifted the truck into drive, and headed straight back to the ranger station. It was only a 5-minute ride from my present location, and I rolled the windows down as I drove down the neatly paved roads that wound around numerous picnic areas, ponds, clusters of trees, fire pits, and pavilions complete with vending machines. It didn't take me much longer to arrive at the station. A large wooden compound with an office, numerous vehicles parked in front, and an exterior that had been freshly painted last month. I noticed that there was a gray sedan that stood out in the sea of trucks, jeeps, and golf carts. For official usage, there was a spot right next to it available, so I parked there and headed inside. No matter what the weather was, the ranger station was always perfectly climate and temperature controlled. Right inside the front door, there was a sitting room filled with comfortable furniture. In 2 of the chairs sat Emmett and a young woman who looked close to us in age. She had curly brown hair, hazel eyes, and a slightly weary attitude that suggested she had visited many places like this. I also noticed the 2 of them had made good use of the nearby refrigerator that held bottled water. They both stood up when I walked inside. I saw Emmett had some papers sitting on the table beside him. "Aiden, this is Lena," Emmett introduced us. We shook hands. "Nice to meet you," I said. "Likewise. I'm just here to double-check. I have no reason to be sure my brother even went this way, but I wouldn't be doing my part if I didn't ask around." I nodded. "Of course. Why don't you tell me what happened? That is, if you don't mind telling it again," she chuckled. "I've told it so many times it's second nature," she said, while sitting back down in her chair. "Sadly, there's not much to tell. My brother Sam has always been flighty, so when he disappeared for a few days, no one thought a thing about it. But when a few days turned into a few weeks, that's when we started to get worried. But when we went to his last address, there was no sign anything happened. And since Sam was always bouncing around, it wasn't exactly a clear-cut case of something being wrong, so there wasn't much for anyone to go on. The only thing we were able to find out was that he was hanging out with a group of friends who were a lot like him within an hour of here. From all appearances, they were just a normal bunch of people. So you think, since people just come and go here, it's entirely possible they set up camp here at some point and left, or even better, are still here. Emmett asked. "Exactly," Lena said. "Sam always did like camping. He's the type who would be perfectly happy always traveling the country in an RV?" Nodded. "Makes perfect sense why you think he might be here." Emmett turned to the papers sitting near him on the coffee table. "This is him, Aiden," he said while he selected one and handed it to me. It was one of those missing person flyers that you put up anywhere, with the phrase "missing" printed on the top in bold red lettering. There was also the standard contact info, but most of the flyer was taken up by a large photo of a blond man with wide hazel eyes. It took me a moment, but I could see the resemblance between Sam and Lena. I've never seen him before around here, but that doesn't mean he's never been here. "Sam's a decent guy," Lena explained. "Flighty, but he's not an angry or mean type. He'd run from a fight instead of starting one." "Is that what you think happened?" I asked. "I've certainly thought about it, but I just can't see it. Like I said, he'd be perfectly happy traveling around in a basic RV, It's far more likely he got into some accident, and no one can get a hold of him, which is another possibility of what he could be doing out here. Emmett took a sip of his bottled water. I've double-checked the log, and we don't have any record of any equipment or RV turning up here with no explanation. Apart from that, the most we could do is take another look around and ask the other park personnel to be on the lookout. I appreciate that very much, Lena said. My whole family would be very grateful if you kept an eye out and notified us, or the police, if you saw or heard anything. Will do, Lena. Emmett stood up from his seat. Thank you for letting us know. We have your information, and we'll let you know if we see or find anything. Thank you. You both have a good one. She stood up, shook hands with us, and walked out the door. Moments later, there was the sound of a car starting up before tires crunched over gravel and pulled away. What do you think? Emmett asked now that we were alone. We've dealt with stuff like this before. I know. He wouldn't be the first to go missing out here, and he wouldn't be the last either, no doubt. Then I took my time for lunch. Today, that meant I had a turkey wrap with some potato salad. Then I went back to work, taking time to keep an eye on the usual areas as I watched people walk their dogs, take hikes or lounge about. It was a sunny autumn day, with a bright blue sky that contrasted beautifully with the occasional orange and red leaves dotting the mostly green tree line. The temperature was warm and comfortable now, but this morning was chilly, and fog blanketed the horizon as I drove to work. It wouldn't be long before both morning and night were much darker and colder. The change of seasons are always stark and captivating to see here in the woods. It wouldn't be long before the days themselves grew darker and colder, and the park was decorated for Halloween. I never failed to be part of the team that decorated and prepared for that since it was fall. That meant dusk settled in quicker than it had just a few weeks earlier. Before I knew it, the shadows were creeping up on the park, which meant it was time for me to politely remind people the park closed at nighttime. The wind picked up by then, which meant the few leaves that had already fallen were being scattered around. The last car had just pulled out of the lot when I locked the entrance for the general public. Then Emmett and I did the last of the closing. Shift checklist before we went out through the employee-only gate and called it a night. I went home, had myself some dinner, and watched some TV before I called it a night. The next morning I had an early shift, but I didn't mind since I was only working a half day. So after I grabbed myself a bagel, I drove to work. The sky was solid gray, with a hint of rain in the air, which matched what I'd seen on the weather report. The drive itself was unremarkable, so I arrived to the park in good time. But as I pulled up to the front gate, which was still locked up from the night before, I saw something. A single, solitary figure, standing just inside the front gate. What? How was that possible? We locked up the same as always, and we'd never had this issue before. Even weirder was the fact that the figure was facing away from the gate, as if watching something inside the park. I pulled off the driveway and called my boss Carlton and told him what was up. He said he'd be right there and told me to sit tight. He didn't want me walking into an unpleasant surprise, and he didn't need to tell me twice. So I waited there, never quite taking my eyes off the front gate, which wasn't hard since whoever was lurking there didn't move. In fact, I wasn't even sure they were aware of my presence since they hadn't reacted at all to the sound of my car. I also noticed they were dressed in clothes that looked faded and torn, after what felt like an eternity. Carlton arrived with a single cop car behind him. They parked ahead of me, and once he and the cop got out of their cars, I did the same. Then the three of us walked steadily towards the gate. It wasn't until we were right on top of the stranger that I finally got a look at who it was. It was Lena's brother, Sam. My stomach clenched at the realization, but Sam showed no interest at all in what was going on. He looked at us as nonchalantly as someone walking here on a hike might glance at a tree. I quickly explained the situation and called Lena. She said she'd be here as soon as she could, and emphatically thanked us. In the meantime, the cop called for backup and an ambulance before he carefully approached Sam and assessed him. The cop decided he was no harm, so Carlton helped escort Sam to the back of his squad car. The ambulance got there before Lena did, so they were still giving him an exam when she arrived. After giving me a bone-crushing hug, Lena went over to where the medics were studying her brother. He's a bit dehydrated and hasn't eaten a decent meal for a while. But apart from that, he seems unharmed. One of the medics, a tall woman with red hair, told her. But there's no doubt he's seen something, or been through something, that rattled him. The other medic, an older man with a mustache, said, I've seen this type of reaction to major traumas before, and he's got all the signs. Do you have any idea what caused it? Lena asked. He shook his head. No, but I can tell you it was something that seriously frightened him. She nodded. All right. Thank you. I appreciate the insight. While that was going on, enough additional park rangers had shown up so we could search the park with the cops close behind. I had no idea what we'd find, but I felt something was wrong from the moment we set foot inside. Every time I arrived here, I felt a sense of calm and peace that came from being in the thick of nature. The scent of pine trees, the warmth of campfires, and the sounds of all the different insects making their presence known. I always found it to be relaxing and invigorating. Not this time. Today, the mood in the park felt different, off, like you were looking at something and could tell some aspect had been changed. But you weren't sure what. The air felt thick and heavy. I glanced at Carlton, and he looked at me, and I could tell he felt the same. On the surface, everything was fine, but that didn't mean nothing happened. So we carefully set out to search every inch of the park to make sure nothing was wrong. Every time I turned a corner or opened a door, I expected to find something horrible, but it never happened. Everything turned out to be perfectly in order. Not a thing was out of place. But we couldn't figure out how Sam had gotten in. How had he done it? Eventually, we had to shrug and admit we couldn't find anything. That was when the search party called it a day, and those of us that were left went to the ranger station for some water. Sam had been taken to the hospital by Lena and her parents, and we'd put up a sign saying the park was temporarily closed. So it was just us. Something is going on here, Emmett said after he took a long drink of water. I just don't know what. I know. But he got in somehow. You saw the state he was in. There was no way Sam forced his way in. Agreed, Carlton said. I just don't like this. I looked around the room. None of us do. Emmett was about to say something else before he stood up and looked around. Then he slowly began to walk around the room. Emmett, I asked. He briefly looked at the window before he turned to face me. Do you feel that? Feel what? The breeze. There's a draft in here. Yeah, I feel it too. One of the cops nodded his head. I think it's coming from over there. He pointed to a large file cabinet against the wall. All 6 of us walked over to it and waited. It didn't take long for me to feel a small breeze coming from around it. We all exchanged a look before Emmett and Carlton slowly maneuvered the metal cabinet away from the wall. Everyone else stood at the ready should something happen. But nothing popped out. All that happened was that the air got colder, and a section of floor opened into a hole in the ground. 2 of the cops immediately took out their flashlights and shined them into the hole. The rest of us peered behind them and saw the hole opened up into a small cave. The flashlights revealed that the cave floor was only about a short drop from the opening. There was no ladder or anything, but it didn't look hard to maneuver. The opening was large enough for a single person to fit through at a time. So Emmett, Carlton, and I went down with the 2 cops with flashlights. They went in first. Then Emmett, Carlton, and I did. The cave was uncluttered by any debris, and there was no water. So there wasn't much to look at. Not that the cave itself took much time to explore either, because before we knew it, we were facing the other end of the cave that turned into a dead end. The 2 cops shined their flashlights around, but there was nothing to see. We all had a last look around before we headed back the way we came. I had no idea what to think. My mind was a jumbled haze of thoughts as we reached where the opening was, and I stopped dead in my tracks. Because of the angle of where the opening was and how the cave was laid out, there was a wall set back a few feet from the opening, and there was something written on the wall that wasn't visible from above. We see you. It was written in red paint with giant letters that could not be missed or misread. The exclamation point in particular was drawn with particular embellishment, as if whoever had done it had enjoyed it immensely. We all looked at it in shock before one of the cops took a picture of it. Then he turned to the rest of us. No need to linger down here any longer. Carlton immediately pointed to Emmett and myself, so Emmett helped me up to the opening. And once I was back inside the ranger station, I helped him out. Once we helped Carlton out, the two cops quickly maneuvered themselves out before, moved the file cabinet back over the cave opening, then we all sat back down in silence. The air was tense and heavy, and I felt a faint prickle of fear on the back of my neck. I didn't know what was going on, but I didn't like whatever it was, and neither did anyone else. We would have noticed that cave opening before, especially with all the recent maintenance work. Okay, cop who took the picture turned to Carlton. He was tall, lean, and had closely cropped blonde hair. Something is going on here, and until we get to the bottom of it, I suggest you close up shop for today. Fine by me, Carlton muttered. Let's get out of here. He hustled out of there before Carlton locked it up tight. Then we all got in our respective vehicles and pulled out after locking up the gate tight. As a precaution, they agreed to have a cop car parked there for the night. I wasted no time in heading for home. But when we all drove away, I swear I thought I saw what looked like a figure in black clothing peering at us from behind a massive tree. When I looked back, there was nothing there. It could have been a prank, or it could have been just my imagination. Either way, I wasn't going back there to find out, because I couldn't stop thinking about the message on the wall. We see you, as in more than one person is watching you. The cops never did find out what was going on, or how Sam had gotten in. But sometimes when I was out on patrols after that, I would swear someone was watching me. I could feel the hair stand up on the back of my neck, and I would get that stomach-churning certainty that something was off. But every time I turned around, nothing was ever there. One time, late at night, I even thought I saw someone following me. But when I went to check, no one was there. But no matter what, I never stopped checking that nothing was there. No one did. Because periodically, we would find something had been moved or altered in some way. Sometimes it was barely noticeable, but that didn't mean we didn't notice. We also had the opening to the cave boarded up, but I can't help but wonder if there are more tunnels just like that elsewhere in the park.